She's queer. She's a witch. She's mean. She's a baby. She's sweaty.
Books. Books. Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that resents its husband ferociously, but in a way that's complicated and kind of endearing. I am your host, Grace Todd, writer, editor, latent witch, and book gremlin. And today, for our very special Halloween episode... Nope.
With me today.
A bevy of book reading beauties. Ladies, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Wow, what an alliteration, Grace.
Thank you.
I'm Kayleigh Hughes. I am a writer and occasional co-host here at Didn't Read It. Super thrilled to be here talking about ... I'll let you share.
Love the tension.
Hi, I'm Jess Versus. I'm a tattooer, artist, crafter, human Muppet person, and third wife of Grace.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm your friend. I sometimes read, and that is my qualifications to be here.
And they are excellent qualifications.
Thank you.
My many wives, my many literate wives. I'm so happy to have all of you.
Thank you for having us.
So today, I have broken the mold a little bit, and I have asked all three of you not to read a book, but to watch a film. Because today we are going to talk about my favorite, my beloved, my hero, Shirley Jackson, and how she has been represented or misrepresented in the 2020 Elizabeth Moss vehicle, Shirley.
Longtime listeners of the pod will remember that we kicked off with an episode about Shirley Jackson.
And my Halloween treat to myself, because this is nothing if not a season of indulgence, is that I'm going to yell about how much I dislike this movie for about an hour.
Yeah, as much as Grace loves Shirley Jackson is how much she hates this film.
I'm so excited.
And then Kayleigh and I took it upon ourselves to read and reread Ruth Franklin's phenomenal biography of Shirley Jackson called A Rather Haunted Life, both as a means of fact-checking the film, and for me, in part, I wanted to make sure that I was being fair with my criticism instead of just angry for anger's sake.
Yeah, this is an excellent biography. It's one of those ones where when folks write about it, they call it the definitive biography.
Oh.
Anytime somebody writes the definitive biography of someone, you know it's really good.
It's difficult for me to imagine one more thorough than this one, which it's rocking like classic biography technique where it starts with her grandfather.
Yeah, I really love it.
Oh, okay. So like we're getting deep.
Did the author of the biography know Shirley personally, or was this written more recently?
It came out in
2016.
Thank you.
Oh, so there's a possibility that that author has also seen the movie and also hates it.
Yeah, we reached out
Probably.
for comment, and she has not responded.
She's like, I don't want to talk about it.
No, you know, she's busy and who knows, but just so you
As is her
know,
right.
Ruth Franklin, that was us, and we love you.
We love you.
So the movie was not based on this book, because it said it was based on a book at the end of it, right?
Such a good observation.
So the movie was based on a book.
Which book? Who knows?
So the movie was based off of a novel called Shirley, a novel. Published in 2014 by the author Susan Scarf Merrill.
Boo.
Susan.
Yeah.
Come on, Susan.
As far as I can tell, I did not read the novel, but as far as I can tell, the movie is a fairly faithful adaptation of the book, with some key differences that I think we'll get into. But yeah, so the same reasons the movie is so confusing are the same reasons that the book is so confusing. When it was released, there's mostly really positive feedback, mostly really positive reviews, and then also some really extreme negative reviews that are the minority. We can...
Sounds right.
Having watched the movie now and knowing that it is a faithful adaptation to the book, I can say that I hate the book. And this is someone that hasn't even read a lot of Shirley Jackson. I read The Lottery in school, and like everybody else did. And that's how they start the movie, which I was just like, come on. Watching the movie, I was just kind of like, this is at odds with everything Grace has ever mentioned to me about Shirley Jackson, to the point where the whole thing was upsetting, and I can understand why you're so mad as a fan of Shirley Jackson. Why did they even bother? Why couldn't they just have made up another author? Why did they have to use Shirley?
Right?
That is a big question I have.
Yeah. So my favorite Goodreads review is from a person called Natalie Tyler. She wrote, as a longtime fan of Shirley Jackson and one-time fan of Meryl, I naturally wanted to read Shirley. How devastated I am to report that I think the quote-unquote novel is a disturbing gimmick that should not be legal.
Snap.
I feel contaminated by association as I continue to read. How can Meryl know any of this? Can it really be legal to fictionalize somebody who has many living relatives and friends left who know more sides to the truth? Is such a work fair?
Natalie.
Meryl's
Contaminated.
ethical scope is about at the level of the paparazzi as far as I can ascertain.
Shots fired. Natalie, if you are out there and you hear this, we want to have you on as a guest. You're officially invited.
And then there's one other one that is much shorter. This one is from Katie, and it's just, I did not finish this libelous tripe.
Amazing.
Libelous tripe.
And
That's
of
going to
course-
be our first t-shirt design.
Because it's a novel, I don't know that it can be considered libel. It's hard to say because it is a fictionalized imagining of Shirley Jackson, but the names, these people that she's created as characters, were real people.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It is a little murky, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like, why not just make up somebody? That's
Schmerly Shakespeare.
like, why can't it just be inspired by Shirley
Yeah,
Jackson?
exactly.
But also, the reason that I decided to focus on the film rather than making you guys read this novel, I mean, maybe you would have just refused, which would have been well within your rights. I think one of the things that got lost in translation when they adapted it to the screen, or one of the things that was intentionally obscured in the adaptation to the screen, was the novel part of it.
Yeah,
completely
they
agree.
dropped the colon a novel from the title.
They did.
Yeah.
And I remember when it came out, the way that it was presented was very much,
Biopic.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I remember that marketing.
and it was, Shirley Jackson as you've never seen her before. And you're like, yeah, because it didn't happen.
No one's ever seen it before.
Including her friends and family.
Yeah, I
Oh
think
my
that's a
God.
huge part of it, is it's telling this story, this fascinating thriller mystery that never happened, and everyone talked about it as if it was a biopic.
Yeah, you just have to be more clear about that. You're just like, oh, this is a fanciful, spooky reimagining. But instead they're like, this the definitive biographical movie about Shirley Jackson's life forever, period.
God, also, there were so many articles. I might have to fact check myself on this.
No.
I feel like I remember there being a bunch of articles about Elizabeth Moss and all the weight she gained to play Shirley. You know, the way that they do that kind of breathless, how did you feel having to make yourself heavier?
How did you do it?
Gross, guys. Inappropriate. But all of that, again, was in service to being like, Elizabeth Moss transformed herself into Shirley Jackson. And I don't know, man, to adapt the novel responsibly, I feel like the best thing they could have done would have been to change the character names and adapt it more emphatically as something inspired by Shirley Jackson. But they went the opposite direction.
And you know the reason why is because name recognition and like sensationalism, and that's the same reason I think that the novel is the way that it is. This woman who loves Shirley Jackson so much, as she said, this author, I can't imagine there's not some benefit in making the author the character rather than just writing a novel and talking about your influences and mentioning that Shirley Jackson is one of them.
Or it's just weird to be like, you're my favorite author ever. I wrote a fictional story about your life. It's like,
fanfic.
exactly.
It's
Just
bad
call it
fanfic.
I wrote a confusing fanfic about you, but I actually got a publishing house to pick it up. It also, both the book and the movie, it feels like award bait. It feels like both of them were like, I'm gonna get so many awards for this.
Yeah.
And then I'll totally get an Oscar.
I mean,
So
to be
brave.
fair to Elizabeth Moss, most of her roles are like her being really kind of ugly-ish and like angry and unlikable, but it definitely seems like an Oscar baity kind of movie.
Yeah, I guess now that you say it, she doesn't really get many like glam roles.
No, she's like a character actress.
Yeah. And, I would say good for her, except I have a little bit of a grudge now. So I was thinking, for the benefit of listeners who have not watched it because we do not want them to, and they probably shouldn't, that we should, as a team, and I'm hoping fairly badly, attempt to recap this film.
Let's do it.
We open on a young woman in a train reading the lottery next to her husband. She is made inexplicably horny by the lottery.
Oh.
They have sex in the train.
That's exactly what happened to me in 9th grade when I read the lottery.
Did you also have sex on a train with your husband?
With my husband, yes.
Yeah.
Listeners may not realize that Kayleigh was a child bride.
Kayleigh's like, I find this relatable.
I had a child husband, so it's not as bad.
It wasn't weird.
As long as he was also a child, then you're fine.
Stop making it weird.
You made it weird.
You're actually a member of European nobility. You were promised as infants. And yeah, it's in one of the weirder moves. She like looks at her husband and she's like, they stone her to death. And then she grabs her husband's dick and then they have sex in a train.
I said, if this is a horror movie at this point, I said, okay, well, she's dying first because she just f***ed on a train and she's obviously the horny one. But I wasn't sure what kind of movie I was signing up for. I was just like, well, she's in danger.
And did you ever really find out?
Nope.
They really did advertise it as a horror film, and then it's not even that.
It's not
it
even
would have
that.
been more fun if it was that. But they get off of the horny train. They're carrying a cake. I was like, how did they not ruin the cake when they were having sex? Doesn't matter. It was just uncovered. They were just raw dogging this cake through the middle of town.
Taking a cake on a train uncovered.
Gross. You don't take all of your cakes that you bake on a train ride just to see the world before you eat it?
Yes, but like in a nice little carrying case.
They walk through the town, are stared at menacingly by Bennington citizens, including small children throwing stones.
What year was this supposed to take place, time-wise?
This mashes together elements from 30 years of Shirley Jackson's life.
Okay. Because when they show up in the town, I was like, 40s, 50s, 60s, 40s, 70s, like 60s?
I think
50.
It's meant to be set somewhere around the early 60s, but as Grace said, the few biographical details that are somewhat accurate are from totally different parts of her life.
Yeah, it's a really weird mashup of like the book that she's working on and the house that they're living in, but her husband's teaching position, none of these things line up. They're all, and like her agoraphobia, those things happened a decade apart from each other.
Gotcha.
So they get to Shirley and Stanley's house for what is very briefly the only realistic portrayal of their home life.
Yeah.
There's a big party happening. Everyone is drunk. Everyone's having a great time. People are spilling from room to room. It's a very diverse crowd. I think maybe that black couple we see for 0.2 seconds are supposed to be the Ellisons.
That was what I suspected as well, which is like, wow, nice job putting the Ellisons in there for, again, less than a second.
Diversity.
You're like, oh, this could have been a much more fun movie where it's just Shirley and Stanley hanging out with the Ellisons.
Which is something I want to get into. The actual facts are very fun and would have made a good movie, but whatever.
But no. And then how does someone else how best to explain Shirley's conduct during this first party scene?
My first note is wholly setting her up as unlikable Batman. She's bitter about money and kind of nagging about that to her husband in the first scene, just making her unlikable as possible towards the young ingenue Rose. I was just like, okay, wait, what? Like, the movie's about what?
But didn't you know I'm a witch, darling? The first time I watched the movie, they got to that line and I just went, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is loosely true, like you said, she and Stanley often did hold court in separate little like circles in their house during parties, and they would just have these like big crowds of people listening to them tell these fascinating stories, and that's like the beginning and ending of things that are true about this movie. And that was briefly charming, but even in that scene, like Stanley's really denigrating about her work, even as he's complimentary, and I don't know, how I think about the movie jumps straight to Shirley and then this young woman who f***ed on the train, Rose, their interaction on the stairs.
Oh, the pregnancy thing.
Oh, yeah. Shirley's able to, like, discern that Rose is pregnant because of her witchy capabilities.
Yeah, she says, I'm a witch, and then she's like, oh, yeah, no one told me you were pregnant. I was like, wait, we went straight from, like, she's an anti-Semite, and she's mad about money to, like, oh, I'm a witch, and also you have a baby.
Yeah, throughout the film, they give her, like, visions? Mm-hmm. They make her magic in a way that I found really off-putting. endearing. And so, yeah, right off the bat, she tells this young woman that she's pregnant, is inexplicably really mean to her, and then just storms off with a bottle of scotch under her arm, which is how we are introduced to the fact that she's going to spend the rest of the film behaving like a drunk, petulant child.
Yep.
Who will not get out of bed.
Well,
With an accent that comes and goes. Not sure where the accent was supposed to be from, and it was only kind of there on some words, and I was like, Elizabeth Moss, you are objectively a good actress. What is this accent, and why is it only here sometimes?
Oscar.
The accent itself is also magic. That's why it appears and disappears.
So a lot of the scenes of these two couples, because the younger people move in with Shirley and Stanley, are at dinner tables or around like in the home, and lots of reviewers compared it to like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, it's that level of melodrama or more. Shirley like accused the baby of not being the dude's, what's his name? I don't even remember his name.
He's so
Fred?
forgettable.
Fred.
He's so forgettable.
Yeah.
Every time he's off
Yeah.
screen, you forget he's there,
It's
and then he comes
Logan
back.
Lerman, and he's hot.
He's an attractive man.
Not hot enough.
But
He's just kind of a plot device in this. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really about like Rose and Shirley and their relationship.
Do they ever actually have people living with them like that?
They set it up. They come to the house on the train. They come to the party. That's their first introduction to Shirley and Stanley. Fred is going to be Stanley's TA, I guess. Wants to get tenure, wants to be a professor himself. And Rose is his wife, who's also going to be going to school at the college, maybe, question mark, but happens to be pregnant also. Shirley and Stanley are taking them in as like boarders, question mark, for an indeterminate amount of time while they get set up at the college and everything. And then Stanley just casually drops the next day like, we just lost our housekeeper. So like, I know that Rose, you're going to school, but could you also just like make food and be a maid and
Thanks.
also keep an eye on Shirley because she's not doing so well.
because she's a big, sweaty baby who can't take care of herself.
A magic big sweaty baby. Like the Jacksons didn't do shit like that in real life.
In real life, they had housekeepers at various points depending on how much money they made. The second time that they lived in North Bennington, they bought this big, rambling, kind of ramshackle old house that had been subdivided into apartments. And they sort of unsubdivided it, but they kept one of the apartments in the back, and they would have friends come live in the apartment for periods of time for funsies.
Yeah.
But no, they did not take in young couples with the express purpose of torturing them psychologically in order to write books.
Cool.
Which appears to be
The setup.
the plan here.
Spoilies.
Stanley immediately is weird toward Rose. He sucks her into being domestic help. Shirley's busy being a big sweaty baby. And at the same time, we are slowly introduced to the fact that a local Bennington girl has gone missing. A student from the college has vanished, named Paula.
And this really happened. And this was the foundation of Shirley's research in real life for the novel that she wrote called Hangs a Man.
Had she only written short stories or novellas up to that point?
She had been writing short stories prolifically. She had started and stopped a couple of different novels. Hangs a Man was the first one she completed, and it came out in the wake of the lottery.
Yeah, Hangs a Man was 1951. So she was fascinated by the disappearance of this woman, Paula, and wrote this book as a sort of reimagining of what a woman who disappeared from a campus much like Bennington might have experienced. But the movie chooses to keep Paula as a real person and to have Shirley be obsessed and to have Shirley be working on Hangs a Man even though it's the 60s. Yeah, and I think that that's kind of complicated because Paula was never found and she's a real person who, you know.
Well, and also, factually, what we know is that Jackson found the story interesting and took inspiration from it and saved like some newspaper clippings. The movie has her doing a full true crime thing.
Yeah.
Red string theory.
Yeah, where she's stealing medical files and she and Rose are sitting around. They borrow the weird structure of detective stories where Shirley is flipping through Paula's medical files, and she's like, severe menstrual cramps the last week of the semester. What does that mean? And Rose has to be like, she was miscarrying. And they do that back and forth thing that
Buddy cop.
that you associate with House or Law and Order.
Yeah.
Yeah, they fixate.
And it's weird. It's very weird. And then Shirley has visions in the bathtub of Paula, again, a real girl who really went missing, bloodily miscarrying everywhere. And then she takes her hand from the bathtub, and then they're in the bathtub together. But actually, it's Rose. And also, there's a whole queer lesbian thing happening between her and Rose, and also her visions of Paula.
That was one of the things that I found very confusing in terms of like, why are we doing this much? It would be one thing if Shirley were fixated on Paula, this story, and she's projecting it. But the fact that Shirley, in these visions of Paula and what could have happened to this person, she's projecting Rose as Paula. Why? What? So you're falling in love with Rose, but you're making her the girl that disappeared, probably dead. Like, what is? Why?
It's just such a shitty thing. I mean, it's shitty enough for Shirley's surviving family to have to deal with this movie, but like for such a terrible event to happen, and then Paula's living family has to see this horror show. Like, it's so fucking disrespectful.
It's not great. It's less than ideal.
Yeah.
You can't do that stuff with like real people. I don't know. Makes me mad.
And then there's an even weirder thing where it appears that Rose is trying to accuse Stanley of being involved in the disappearance.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
Unclear if the movie wants us to think that that's the case, or if this is Rose's attempt to not be alienated.
I don't know. I think the movie does not a good enough job of conveying if it's just Rose's delusion, but it is very explicit that like Stanley and Shirley never knew Paula in real life, which is not something that someone should have to clarify, but for the fact that this fictionalization, which comes from the novel fictionalization, put these things together, like proposed the suggestion that maybe Stanley was having an affair with Paula because he did have affairs with everyone, but he didn't have an affair with this woman who disappeared.
Did Paula, the woman who disappeared, factually in real life disappear from the same college that Stanley was working at? Okay.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if they took liberties with that too, because they might as well have, because they were just making all kinds of other shit up.
And the author's like, I'm just asking questions.
Just asking.
Yeah, that part does feel a little like that specifically. The Shirley Rose, they get more intertwined and obsessive and reliant on each other, and yeah, become like romantically implied to be sexually involved, which would have been maybe a cool or non-remarkable detail for a story if there was any indication in Shirley Jackson's life that she was queer,
But there really is not.
there's not, and it's a really interesting choice.
That was one of my big questions watching this was, wait, I don't remember anything about Shirley Jackson ever being queer or having any interest openly in women. And I was like, maybe I missed something in the biography I didn't read, but
She's queer. She's
I don't
a witch.
remember-
She's mean. She's a baby. She's sweaty.
like I think I remember something about agoraphobia and depression ? And I mean, yeah, but like the way that this was presented was the most confusing depression I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Also
it really
psychosis, like so she's having visions, so are they saying that her depression was making her manifest entirely different worlds?
Wait, do we all feel like the movie came down pretty firmly on Shirley actually being magic? Because that's where I felt it landed.
I don't know.
I couldn't tell, which is also a problem, because I was like, wait, so she pulled 3 of the same card out of the tarot deck, which we all know can't happen because that's not how that works.
It can if you're magic.
But she, it was my understanding that when she said, I'm a witch, it was a tongue-in-cheek thing because she was just sick and tired of people being all up in her business, basically.
I would like to think that, but nothing about that movie feels tongue-in-cheek at all. It's just so self-serious for every goddamn endless minute.
The death cap mushrooms, I think, are a really good example. The scene where Shirley, after being in the house for so long, but she randomly bursts out of the house and runs away to a forest, and Rosie runs after her, and she forces Rosie to eat a death cap mushroom, but it's not, or whatever. But this really super witchy moment where she's like, confront death, and we'll confront death together, and it's very sexy and dark and twisted, but
And then they have sex on a train.
Yes, psychosexual mushroom exchanging.
I like you, Rosie. Why would I want to harm you? You could run. Why don't you? Why do you stay? Can I trust you? Do you want to betray me?
Yeah, that. What is that dialogue? What is that dialogue?
I wrote that down because I was
Somebody
like,
tell me.
what is going on right now? This is taking all these weird turns. Like,
and then in reality, which I read the book, the biography after I watched the movie, Shirley didn't know shit about mushrooms until she was researching for We've Always Lived in the Castle, her last completed novel, when she borrowed a bunch of books about mushrooms and plants and stuff from a friend so that she could learn a mushroom that would kill people. And that's where she learned about the death cap mushroom. She was not cultivating a deep passion for like taunting people
Mycology.
psychosexually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Psychosexual mycology.
collapsing the timeline again, which this movie seems to be collapsing the timeline a lot.
And so she and Rose are in the throes of this kind of magical influenced lesbian-y codependent affair. Rose has her baby, and Shirley is of all positioned as being kind of a hag, and there's some very weird stuff where she appears to be either jealous of Rose's fertility or obsessed with it in ways that aren't entirely healthy.
But she had a bunch of kids.
That was a huge thing where I was just like, Shirley had kids.
Like,
when are we
she is
ever going to get to that?
Obviously fertile.
Now we're getting to
They
it.
never once in the movie mentioned the fact that Stanley and Shirley have kids.
So here's the thing, but very quickly. Rose has her baby, and that appears to be in the film, the fictional Shirley's sign to just drop her. Shirley is just done with
Boo.
it. Wipes her hands of the whole thing. And Rose makes her last salvo to recapture Shirley's attention by basically forging a library checkout slip to imply that the missing girl was in Stanley's class.
Planting evidence.
And Rose has been seduced into thinking that she and Shirley are on a side together. But at the end of the day, when Rose tries to meaningfully threaten Shirley and Stanley's marriage, they band back together. And Shirley, fictional Shirley, lashes out at Rose and is like, your husband's been having sex with other people this entire time! And Rose flips out, storms off, and threatens to kill herself. And, you know...
After Shirley eats the library card. Like, I was like, wait, I had to go back and rewind it because I felt like I missed something. No, she just rips it up and eats it because threats to Stanley? Again, not quite sure. I had a big question mark.
It's because she's a bad, gross, fat lady, you see, and so eating
right.
things is her only means of
Just
defense
getting rid
in
of
the
him.
world.
Yeah.
It's a wonder she didn't eat the baby.
That was in a deleted scene. It was in the novel, but they cut it for length, you know.
Yeah.
You gotta pare these things down. I don't know, man.
Yeah, so after Rosie almost jumps off a cliff and Shirley talks her back, Fred and Rosie drive off, and it seems that she's going to be taken to an institution. And Shirley hangs a man. Stanley says it's her greatest work. And they celebrate in their very quiet home.
Oh, and Stanley, it's implied, kind of ruins Fred's career. So, yeah, Shirley assists in driving Rose bonkers, it may be to an institution, and Stanley exploits and belittles Fred. And once these two horrible, maybe slightly magical people have milked everything good from these young people, they cast them back into the world, probably to do it all over again because they're so bad and creepy. The end? More or less?
Yay.
More or less.
So Shirley and Stanley had 4 children.
Real Shirley and Stanley.
We will leave fictional Shirley and Stanley behind, except insofar as we are going to
Dunk on them.
dunk on them.
God. Because they're awful.
And pivot into real Shirley and Stanley, the married couple who existed, and their 4 children. To me, one of the biggest and most important things here, there is no conceivable period of Jackson's life that this movie could be set during, with the exception of one single summer where they did not have at least one child in the house.
Oh, wow.
There is exactly one summer where all 4 children were off at various camps and things, and she and Stanley had the home to themselves. That was also the summer that her agoraphobia started getting worse, in part because she had severe colitis.
Oh, no.
Bummer.
Poor thing.
It turns out if you have severe intestinal distress with some regularity, leaving the house becomes kind of fraught and upsetting. Theoretically, you could argue that the movie is set during this one single summer when the house was not brimming with children, but it would be a real stretch.
Grace, I love that you've put this much thought into it, and even given the filmmakers the possibility that they made that choice intentionally, that this was a possible out for them, because the answer is so much dumber.
Wait, we have an answer?
Yeah, the children were in the novel.
Oh, what?
And the director interviewed with Vox along with Elizabeth Moss, and I can pull quotes from both of them. The director, Josephine Decker, said, "Having the kids was very complicated, so we took out her children."
What?
And
What on earth?
The definitive biography of Shirley Jackson.
and then
It was too hard, so we didn't do it. Isn't making a movie hard? I'm sorry, what? I haven't made a lot of feature films, but I have director friends, and I don't think it's easy.
And Elizabeth Moss talks about meeting Lawrence, which I've got a couple different articles about. And she was like, when I met her son, I had to be like, yeah, sorry about that. She was an incredible mother. Despite her quirks, she was a really wonderful, kind, loving, fun mom. But for the purposes of our story, we had to cut that out.
You're right. That is so much dumber than I could possibly have anticipated. God. What the fuck?
Like the fact that even this really annoying novel still built in the children that were so critical to how she viewed the type of literature that she wrote and the way that she handled herself as a writer and also a woman and a wife and mother and all of that. Like even the novel had the kids.
It was the great central tension of her entire life.
Yeah, but is it good Hollywood?
It's complicated.
What happens when you erase the children, one of the things that is so insulting about the way that she's portrayed in this movie is that at no point in her entire adult life would she have had the luxury of spending entire days on end swanning about in bed being a petulant baby while her husband begged her to come to eat a real meal at the dinner table for once, because she was the one making the dinner so that the children could eat, because there were 4 of them.
Right. After Shirley died, Stanley, and this, I think his kids was what they said in the bio, he didn't know how to make coffee by himself.
Oh my god.
Stanley could not function alone. He did not know how to do anything.
Truly anything, because she was not only the homemaker, wasn't she also the breadwinner?
She was the primary breadwinner.
Yeah.
And did all of the cooking and all of the cleaning and all of the shopping. Stanley didn't know how to drive.
He never learned.
God.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's just another thing on his list. There's nothing wrong with not knowing how to drive, except if you're Stanley.
It's just in every conceivable way, he passed on all of the burdens of having a family and running a home onto his wife while he lived a, frankly, completely feckless life of the mind. On every conceivable front, down to driving. That to me is what makes it funny, is he couldn't even learn how to drive. He had to be chauffeured to campus because he was just a big, soft brain man.
He's the baby.
He is
the actual baby.
He is
the
a
baby.
fifth baby.
Yeah.
One of the cartoons, Shirley drew these little cartoons throughout her life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and
I
they
wanna
would
see
sort
that.
of document her feeling, her mental state. And one, when she had her first kids, Lawrence, it's called Feeding Time, and it's Lawrence with a bottle and Stanley with a wine bottle.
Yeah.
She's like feeding them both.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
The way that the movie ended, so all of a sudden now she's seeking Stanley's approval, and she's so excited, and his opinion of the book is the only one that matters, which I was just like, I also don't feel like this seems accurate to what I know about her.
That's one of her little cartoons.
I love that.
As our resident artist, do you want to take a stab at describing what's going on there?
All right, there is 2 cartoony figures, one of which looks like a bird on a rope swing, and the other of which is a little person wearing a dress with crazy long hair sticking up reading a book on what looks like the bank of a river or something, and it said he's either drowning or fishing.
One of the first places they moved after they married was this cabin in
New Hampshire?
it was the cabin in New Hampshire that didn't have
Shout out 603.
running water, and they had to cut their own wood, and Stanley apparently was not
Super
hugely
useful.
Really?
And that's
He tried to get into it. Both of them tried to get into it, but they just about made it through, and that's the best we can say for living that kind of life.
Relatable.
and they still bailed earlier than they intended to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the interest of fairness, I feel like we should take a very quick detour where I am going to explain the ways in which Stanley is not as bad as I am always tempted to make him.
That's nice of you.
I think, in fairness to Stanley, who was a piece of shit in a lot of ways, however, he did see her talent very early, and he did go out of his way to nurture it, especially very early, before she had been published, before she became more successful than he ultimately was, and the resentment kind of marred their dynamic, I think. He was a great cheerleader for her. He was a great reader for her. He really did everything in his power to help her succeed and to shield her from the sting of her early failures. It did come with a lot of fucked up shit. I do not think that your sort of greatest professional cheerleader and your husband should be the same person. I don't think that's good. I don't.
Controversial opinion.
I mean, and let me know if you still got good things to say about him. But
Are we done with that part?
There aren't many.
yeah. Because that so quickly turned into him shaming her for making more money than him, but also putting all of this pressure on her to be the person bringing in money, so that he was haranguing her whenever she wasn't writing, and ultimately putting a dollar amount on every letter that she wrote when she could be writing sellable stuff.
Yeah. As she became the primary breadwinner and as his professional failures continued to stack up, the dynamic between them, I think, curdled irreparably.
And he's cheating on her constantly, despite him knowing for their entire life that she doesn't like it.
Yeah, it was basically as soon as they started dating in college, he never stopped having sex with other women. And when she told him she didn't like it, he
said that like monogamy wasn't natural or whatever.
That old chestnut.
Yeah. But like you can't just, you have to have 2-party consent to be in a non-monogamous relationship. And that's clearly what he wanted, but never really had. And she was just devastated and emotionally hurt all of the time. She, I think, tried sleeping with someone else like one time, and it was awkward and weird. And Stanley got mad.
I was about to say, and how did he react to that?
and he did not love it.
And
Really?
probably not a woman, as we've established.
Yeah, there's no documentation of that.
Yeah, no. She did maybe almost have sex with the poet Dylan Thomas,
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah, we don't know for sure.
but he was too drunk to get it up, is what he apparently reported to a mutual friend of theirs.
Oh.
But the fact of the matter is that both of these people are dead. For better or worse, they remained married for her entire life, and he outlived her only by a handful of years. And that for, how long were they married? Like 40 years, something like that?
She
Too
was only
long.
48 when she died.
Oh,
so.
duh.
But they got married,
got married
you know,
at 8.
Just like Kayleigh.
but they got married early, right? Like,
So they were married for like 20, we'll call it 20-ish years.
Yeah.
But so they were married for 20-ish years, and it doesn't seem entirely fair from the perspective of now and today, and from not having known either of them interpersonally. It doesn't seem entirely fair to boil it down to just like, light Stanley Hyman on fire. which is, I'm only saying this because that is my instinct. I don't know. Their relationship seems complicated and sometimes really destructive and sometimes a thing that she derived a sense of stability from. And they had 4 children, and as far as I can tell, those 4 children loved their father. And like, I don't know. I'm just trying not to be too...
I mean, I think it's fair to say that nobody knows what goes on in a relationship between 2 people unless you're one of those 2 people. And even then, there's a perspective that each of those people have. Their kids don't know exactly all of the facets of the relationship. We, as people who've read biographies and read their work and everything, like, we can't...
seen the movie.
And seen the movie. We've definitely all seen the movie. We can't ever know exactly the relationship, like the nature, the full entire nature of it, because we're not them.
I think this is very admirable, and that it's definitely the right approach to take. Because I'm having a hard time doing that, because I've seen these relationship dynamics play out in relationships with my friends, unfortunately, and I have no trouble believing that is how it happened.
Well,
you know.
And I think that in the nuanced category is towards the later years when she was having many of her health troubles, her agoraphobia, her colitis. He went with her to every doctor appointment. He was there a lot of times when she would be giving lectures and she would be afraid that midway through she would have to stop, and he would always be there to swap out her place. They would have a thing prepped. He was her partner in like a support role for those kinds of things.
Oh, that's nice.
And like clearly cared about her as like a human being that he, deserved to be healthy. And one thing that, again, like he sucks, but one thing that I found like charming is I don't remember who told the anecdote, but this friend of theirs was staying in a hotel room adjacent to them, and he heard the 2 of them like cackling and laughing. And they were in the bathroom and they were weighing themselves, and they thought it was just hilarious how high their weights were because they loved eating so much, and they were being told to lose weight, but they were just like having a ball of a time being like, oh my god, look at that. And it was a thing the 2 of them were both doing versus like shaming each other.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that with anybody, and that's a level of intimacy that is really hard to achieve.
In addition to like what I just said about seeing, unfortunately, these, as I'm sure, we've all seen versions of these relationship dynamics play out. You do remember that there's a reason, even when relationships aren't perfect, there's a reason that you were attracted to the person in the first place, and that you got together with them, and that you chose to stay with them. And those reasons are personal, and that is that person's own life, and that is their agency, and, and they're all dead now, so we don't know.
We'll never
rest
know.
in peace. We just don't know. So,
I was actually about to say, just like, we are all being so mature and level-headed, and that's enough of that.
Yeah. Back to talking.
That being said, if Stanley was cheating on my ass as much as he cheated on her...
Yeah. I'd be like, what do you bring to this?
A little over a year after she died, he was married to a former student of his.
Oh,
Shocker.
interesting.
Yeah, well, someone had to make the coffee.
And chop the wood, rear the children.
I've got a few responses from Shirley's oldest son, Lawrence, about the movie.
Wow.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
One is in the New Yorker, and it's, if someone comes to the movie not knowing anything about my parents, they will certainly leave thinking that my mother was a crazy alcoholic and my father was a mean critic. And the other one, though, that I think is really an important observation, one is just a sort of a fun fact. My mother would never have openly insulted someone at the dinner table, as she does in the movie. She was very proper, but he says, there are enough real facts in the movie to make you think it's a biopic, but then it diverges, becoming entirely fiction. This is in the Press Democrat. And I feel like that's the problem that we have with it, is that because there are elements that are true, how is anybody supposed to be able, who is not coming in with a whole bundle of research, to be able to identify what's true and what's not?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where fact and fiction diverge in the story, I think what I find most insulting, and eliminating her children as part and parcel of this, but doesn't encompass it quite, is that the central tension of her life, and in my unqualified opinion, the thing that ultimately killed her, was the need to keep up with and conform with and be accepted by exactly the kind of people that in the movie she is portrayed as blithely, gleefully alienating, insulting. The movie has her pouring wine all over a sofa at a fancy party.
Yeah.
If she had felt that level of permissiveness to just swan about and croak and screech and growl and be wasted and fall over and make messes and stick cigarettes out in things and grab people by the face. I don't think she would have been so pent up, so wound up on so many medications. She was on so many pills. She was on diet pills. She was on uppers. She was on downers. They had her on a pharmaceutical cocktail.
That'll fuck you up so much.
Especially when combined with yo-yo dieting, heavy drinking, heavy smoking.
They had her drinking this stuff where it was like 900 calories a day, her and Stanley both, to try and get him to lose weight, along with all the pills. And she was miserable and self-conscious about being a fat woman her entire life. And one thing that I think is really interesting and goes along with what you're saying, Grace, is a lot of this pressure her mother started and then seemingly just never stopped, just an ongoing stream of criticism about what she looked like that continued in letters, so many, forever and ever.
Oh my God.
Her mom was a bully.
She'd have a new book released and the mom would write like, how can you possibly disrespect yourself and your husband and your children by allowing yourself to look the way that you do?
Oh my God.
Oh, no.
Wretched, really hurtful insult. Yeah, and I think that definitely shaped Shirley's attempts to conform.
I guess knowing all this, you could conceive of the movie maybe as a revenge flick or something, which could be fun if you make that explicit that that's what you're doing.
It did occur to me on this watch, because I have now watched this movie too many times.
Once is too many.
It's becoming like an annual tradition for you.
The annual hate watch.
Yeah.
Surely.
It occurred to me this time that, you could make a reasonable argument for the film as kind of, what if Shirley had been set loose to just be what she wanted and hadn't been weighed down by children? And it's not like she's particularly happy.
No.
The character in this film is
That's a good point.
Miserable.
She's
Miserable.
Yeah. She's crawling and croaking through the film because she's deeply unhappy. There is nothing satisfying about her character. There's nothing triumphant about her character. The last scene after she's finished the book, she says it hurts so much this time. And it doesn't feel good.
It's like not only did you completely make up this version of her, but you made it the worst possible version.
Yeah.
And then pretended like you were honoring her in some way. And it's just so disrespectful.
Just make a cool story that's inspired by the kinds of aesthetic and like thematic interests of Shirley Jackson. Like,
Well, clearly, there's only one solution here. What was the author's name?
Susan Scarf Merrill.
I would like you all to know that my upcoming magnum opus, Susan Scarf Merrill, a novel, will be coming out this spring. It's about a novelist who is kidnapping small children. I'm really going for the QAnon market here.
Sounds true to me.
Yep.
Pizza parlors are involved.
If it were just a made up main character, just like some lady, fictional lady, like how would you feel about the movie?
Yeah, I think it'd be like a fun movie. I think I'd like it. I love a good soapy family drama, relationship drama kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you stripped it of all biographical affiliations, I think I'd find it fine.
Yeah.
It'd just be fine.
Yeah, like kind of campy, psychological.
Yeah, a little surreal.
It feels similar to what happened to, and like I keep thinking about this, is just kind of feels like this keeps happening to Shirley Jackson's legacy because it first happened with The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, which was just...
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot that was Shirley, too.
And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be completely honest. I did not read The Lottery in high school. I didn't know about Shirley Jackson until The Haunting of Hill House came out. And then her name was everywhere. And I was like, oh, cool. And I think I talked to you, Grace, and you were like, it has nothing to do with the book. They just used the name. And now now it just feels like it just happened again.
Yeah.
And
so the same guy who did The Haunting of Hill House, his adaptation of The Fall of the House of Usher dropped on Netflix this week.
Uh-oh.
that I did read.
And I am so curious to see.
It's just about Usher.
No, but that's exactly it. Usher. No,
Usher.
Shirley felt like she was never seen, like she was lonely, that Stanley promised that she wouldn't be lonely, and she was lonely. And so now if people keep not seeing her, not representing her in the way that she really was, that's what feels so misguided.
Well, and the witchy stuff, she felt stalked her career and overshadowed her work in ways that she really didn't like, but it sold. She was no dummy. She understood publicity, and her publishers were constantly playing up the, she's a housewife with a broomstick. Isn't that wacky? And there are all these letters where she's just like, I wish I could just crawl into a hole. This is mortifying, but like it sells books. So
She's not out there giving tarot card readings for reasons.
And the tarot card thing, she did have tarot cards. She dressed up at one point for like a Halloween thing and did tarot readings on the college campus.
Cute.
Right, because she wasn't widely hated. She was part of the community. She was a bit of an outsider, but she was not widely reviled and spitting at people and hissing.
Yeah, she wasn't a feral cat.
There's one part in the movie where Fred, the
Forgettable guy.
the forgettable pseudo professor
The
guy,
who?
the what?
Yeah.
Forgettable Fred says women like Shirley don't have friends, and I was like, I feel like that categorically was not true. Like, I think Shirley had friends in real life.
Speaking of lines in the movie that just made me go, ah! They had so many friends. If you read the biography, it is anecdote after anecdote after anecdote about people that they encountered personally or professionally who did not have to become so thoroughly entangled in their lives, and who yet became their children's godparents, who did them huge favors, who became staunch advocates of their work. They were apparently incredibly likable, very funny, very engaging, amazing hosts. People consistently pointed out that Shirley especially had a way of effortlessly making sure that everyone had what they needed. Going to the Hyman house, there was always drinks, there were always cigarettes, there was always food. It was big and raucous and fun. There was just kind of always a party going on, especially for several years, at different points.
Bit of a salon.
Yeah, it really was. And they were very good friends with a bunch of very famous authors contemporarily. Like the
Ellisons for 2 seconds.
Yes, yeah, exactly. All 2 seconds. Ralph Ellison was the godfather of one of their children. He drove Shirley to the hospital to give birth.
Wow.
Yeah, they were in each other's lives like their entire life. The Ellisons and the Hymans were like very close.
Well, a lot of this is part of the reason why the biography is able to be so detailed, is because there are so many sources of people being like, oh, I'll talk about her.
Yep.
Oh, I have something to share.
First-hand accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many friends she had?
I was ranting to Corey about this morning because there's this whole aside about the Frenchman who was their go-to book acquirer. The book guy, who was apparently a little bit of a handful, could be turned off very easily, but if he loved you, he loved you. And he also became one of the godfathers of their children and would take them to boxing matches and baseball games. They became very good friends. And then during one of their last moves, because they moved several times throughout the course of their marriage, he and several of his staff members showed up to organize and pack their library for them.
Aw.
Because they owned thousands of books.
Like 25,000 books.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a really nice thing to do.
I know.
You don't do that for someone you don't like.
Right.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have any friends?
Yeah.
Come on now.
But, she was busy being sweaty and cackly, and obviously everyone hated her.
And yeah, she wasn't a Vermonter, she was never a part of the Vermont community in the way that somebody born there who was very traditional was. But that's a totally different thing from, the creep ghoul that they portray her as.
Yeah, that's a completely different thing from not being capable of observing social niceties. And I did actually want to make sure that one of the things we touched on very briefly was in this film, and I think too often in accounts of her outside of Franklin's very excellent biography, her agoraphobia is presented as being completely irrational and kind of coming out of nowhere, and is framed in this fucking movie as being part of that kind of big bratty child thing. It's it's weird. It's an agoraphobia that's very selective. But it's really worth noting that, as we were just saying, they were surrounded by friends. They did live in a number of communities where they had trouble fitting in. A substantial part of that was the fact that Stanley was Jewish, and anti-Semitism never really went away. Right before one of her last sort of turns for the worse, they found out that a teacher was physically abusing one of their children.
Oh my God.
No.
And several other children. And Jackson was certain that the minute she and the other parents complained, that the teacher would be put out on her ear. Instead, the community banded together and doubled down, and the teacher was allowed to continue working at the school until she retired. And in retaliation, people started dumping their trash cans out in their yard, and at one point vandalized their house with swastikas.
Oh my God.
So
Damn.
her agoraphobia, that, and taking into account that she had colitis and she had health issues, and I have some people that I love very much who have chronic gastrointestinal problems, and it makes leaving your house very fraught. you know?
Is it
Like,
agoraphobia or is it a legitimate response to like your medical issues and your environment,
Yeah, I think it's really important to point out that they had dealt with a lot of pretty frightening behavior from the world over the years. They were at one point under investigation for being suspected communists.
Classic.
Her children relate it sort of jocularly, but people threw stones at them
Yeah.
for being outsiders in these very insular little New England communities that they
Where
moved
could the
into.
lottery have come from?
Yeah.
It's
Such
shocking.
a fantastic work of imagination.
It's not a reaction to nothing, and yet she still managed to be, by all accounts, funny and charming and whimsical and a pretty indulgent and attentive, very present mother, and a pretty good fucking wife considering everything she was dealing with, and the main breadwinner of the household, and a reasonably dutiful daughter, even though her mom sucked.
And like a once in a generation talent. And,
Yeah.
like,
She really did it all, and it killed her, but she did it, and I don't think she gets enough credit.
It feels like they kind of combined Shirley's mom's abuse of her with Stanley's abuse. Because when you were talking about how they were stepping on a scale and laughing, like twice in the movie, Stanley comments on her weight. And they never really touch on diet pills or anything, which I was kind of waiting to see if they would touch any pharmaceutical or anything, and they didn't. But he comments on her weight twice, and then she has kind of a meltdown in the dressing room, but then they never... I was like, if you only touch on it like that, why even include it at all? Stanley himself was very critical of her appearance and her looks, and in the movie in a way where I was like, this doesn't necessarily square with the other stuff that we kind of talked about with him, which I also found confusing.
That doesn't really seem to have been an issue between them. The movie seems totally fine with punishing her for her weight. The movie seems to believe that she, at least on some level, deserves to feel terrible about herself. And I think the movie also, I can't believe I've spent as much time as I have standing up for him, but the movie makes Stanley sort of one-dimensionally cruel in a way that doesn't feel right.
that so rarely actually happens.
The way that the fictional version of him lashes out at forgettable Fred, the TA. One of Jackson's chief complaints about Stanley and his teaching was that he put so much work and so much emotional energy into his students that she felt he was neglecting her and the kids. But he was, by all accounts, on campus, he was extraordinarily generous with his students and very thoughtful about being very supportive of them. So, like, all of the lashing out that his character does it doesn't make any particular sense.
No.
Like, he's cruel to her for no reason.
The quote, Lawrence was their son, that said that if you watch the movie, you would think that my dad was a harsh critic, but it wasn't just about her work. It wasn't just when he said writing this type of horror mystery is beneath you.
Oh, yeah.
He was a harsh critic about her work, but he said about Forgetful Fred that the thing that offended him most was mediocrity, and he was a critique of her weight and her appearance and this and that, and he critiqued the cooking of Rose one time, just everything. He was just a critic of everything.
Just like a one-dimensional meanie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Stanley Hyman, famous one-dimensional meanie. Shirley Jackson, sweaty magic toad child baby.
Well, he critiqued her also in the movie for not getting out of bed and not doing anything. But then when she started writing and she was making pages and pages of writing, he was saying, why are you writing so much? You have to come have dinner with me because I feel like a widower. I had him in my notes. You literally are complaining about everything she's doing. She can either be depressed in bed, you complain about it, or she can write all day and do something and you would complain about that too.
And again, the dinner that in real life she had to make every single night or no one would eat.
For 6 people.
Yeah. Yeah. Not small. Yeah. What's
What's really frustrating is that when someone dies before getting really famous, like famous artists like Van Gogh. We assume that then these modern unearthings of their life are the truth and that now they're getting their just due. And I think we, as a society, maybe we give them more credit than perhaps we should because they're still just a later interpretation of someone's life. But we've gotten so used to that dynamic of this person wasn't really known before and then, they lived in anonymity, which, not that Shirley, she was very successful, but the worldwide perhaps levels of fame recognition that she has now, she did not have then. So we tend to put a lot of faith in that dynamic of, and now we know the real story. And it's just really frustrating to see that happen to someone where there is evidence. There is this amazing biography. There are a lot of friends. There are living children. And just to get this big cash grab, flashy, cashing in on like spooky season, quote unquote, inspired by a true story movie that now everyone is going to kind of take as gospel. When she was such a more interesting her real life was so much more interesting and they just used it to make a mediocre movie.
I think the reason that it is worth standing on a soapbox and screaming about this, I think the reason it's so important to me is that the tensions, the expectations, the demands that derailed Jackson's health and life are still there. It is still so difficult, especially for women, to have creative careers and families and to be allowed to hold both of those things without being asked to dismiss or denigrate one or the other. We still cannot let women be both mothers and professionally successful. We won't let them do it.
Yep.
And we need more stories about people who really wanted to be both mothers and professionally creative. And we need to be reminded that it almost cannot be done.
Yeah, so many women saw themselves in the fiction that Shirley wrote because those tensions were so present. And I think a lot of women could have seen themselves in an accurate biopic of Shirley Jackson's life.
Especially because she low-key invented the relatable mommy blog.
I know, I thought about getting into that, but too late now.
Another time. Just Google Shirley Jackson mommy blog and I guarantee something will pop up.
On the next episode of Didn't Read It, mommy blogs.
How and why Shirley Jackson invented them.
She kind of did, though. I'm just saying.
Totally did.
Dang.
I believe it.
That's cool.
She was incredible. A creative juggernaut. Could not be stopped until she was, very abruptly.
Rest in peace.
Happy Halloween.
Oh, Shirley, we love you.
All right. Quick poll, everyone. Which part of the movie did you viscerally hate the most?
Probably when she ate the library card.
Yeah. That got a big what the f in my notes. Also the bathtub miscarriage future projection. Also at one point the future projection of the missing girl had like a lesbian lover in the woods whose face we never saw, and I was like, is that supposed to be Shirley? Like, what is going on? These choices are so strange.
Probably the part where she says sluts really loud.
Well, I hope we've done Jackson some justice here. I hope everyone out there has enjoyed or at least tolerated our little diversion from the usual formula. I promise we are not going to become a talking shit about movies podcast, but maybe once a year as a little treat to me.
It becomes don't watch it. Yeah.
Didn't read it, don't watch it. Ladies, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Woo woo.
An honor and a privilege to be with all of you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
This was really fun. Jess and Leigh, is there anywhere you would like to be found? Anywhere you would like to direct people? Anything you'd like to take a moment to promote.
You can find me on Instagram at Jess Versus, or you can catch me where I tattoo at Zenith Collective on Broad Street, at Zenith Richmond on Instagram.
For me, no.
All right. Well, go find Jess. Avoid Leigh at all costs.
Thank you.
Kayleigh, anything you'd like to throw out before we...
Well, as always, I am on social media as Kayleigh Q, just the letter on Instagram, and then the British spelling of like line on Twitter, Queue.
Go find Kayleigh. Tell her how great she is. Tell all of them how great they are, except Leigh. Avoid her at all costs.
Yeah. I'm not here.
Thank you again, all of you out there, for being here with us this week. We will be back next week. And until then, as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could sure use the love. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Didn't Read It was created, written, and edited by me, Grace Todd. Kayleigh Hughes is our publicist and producer. You can follow the podcast on Twitter or Instagram at Didn't Read It Pod, or reach us via email at didn'treaditpod@gmail.com. For source notes and further reading, as well as a list of all existing episodes, please visit our website at didn'treaditpod.com. We are recorded in Richmond, Virginia, with special thanks to Black Iris Social Club and Pesca Trio Publishing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review or rating on your preferred podcasting platform, or just tell a friend. If you did not enjoy today's episode, we are currently accepting applications for a full-time nemesis. Our intro music is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.